Okay, great. So let's see. Sorry. I am still not very used to using Zoom, but I'm getting better at it, I think. So with one of the things that I get asked a lot when people come in and see the clinic and see all these bottles and jars and everything of herbal remedies is, do you grow all of this yourself? And usually I say something along the lines of, I grow a little bit of it myself, but most of it grows itself. Most of it just grows in the wild. What I really want to say about that, something a little more in depth, which is that I grow the garlic, but the hawthorn tree was planted by birds 50 years ago, and the oak was planted by squirrels 500 years ago. This bloodroot here, this stuff is planted by ants. They take the seeds down into their nests and they cultivate the soil around them and they fertilize it with their dead, and it grows, and then they eat the little flesh that's attached to the fruit and take it down into their nests again. So, you know, it's a lot of our woodland root crops are cultivated that way. They're more or less intentionally grown by colonies of ants. And, you know, birds distribute most of the things that have berries on them, squirrels, and sometimes some birds cache nuts, some of which end up growing into other things. So a lot of plants are grown by animals. Some of them are blown on the wind, like, well, dandelions, obviously, which we talked about before, but also some big trees like poplars and cottonwoods. Willows have fluffy seeds that are often carried down river and grow into new things. So there are a lot of different ways and a lot of different forms of energy, a lot of different sources of the work behind planting new plants. And humans can be that when they choose to be, and probably always have been. And just like the ants, sometimes it might not have been entirely intentional, but it wasn't entirely unintentional either. You know, people scatter seeds from the things that they're harvesting, and those seeds grow into new things. And sometimes they do it very intentionally, and eventually they came up with a complicated system that people started describing it as agriculture or farming. And that's sort of, you know, basically a natural outcropping of mindful harvesting, mindful gathering and foraging of wild plants. So for instance, if you were digging up certain plants, you would wait until after they had gone to seed before you harvested the roots, or you might you know, save the seeds and scatter them, you know, possibly just because they weren't entirely good to eat, but also in so doing, you would pretty quickly come to understand that, you know, places where you spit out a bunch of watermelon seeds, not that you would have had watermelons at that point, but seeds from whatever you didn't want to swallow the seeds from, they grow into new things. Passion fruit is something like that in our fields around here. You crack it open, it's a little hollow ball, and you crack it open and there's little seeds inside it covered with sweet fruit, sweet edible stuff, sort of like what's inside a pomegranate. And you suck the sweet stuff off and you spit out the seed, and that sometimes does and sometimes doesn't grow into a new passion flower vine. And you can find passion flower vines all over the place in the woods, and I mean edges of woods and fields around here. So at some point, people started getting a lot more intentional about that and digging up the ground, fertilizing, watering, everything like that. And so, you know, it's kind of a slow growth of growing, a slow process of developing the techniques of growing. And so eventually you have what you have now, which is where there's you know, lots of knowledge and lore and industry and so forth around organically growing medicinal plants as well as food plants, and often they're the same plants. A lot of our medicinal stuff is actually also food. And if you go to places where domestic medicine and herbal medicine and people taking care of their own healthcare is still more of a part of the culture, you'll find a lot more things doing double duty as food and medicine. For example, cabbage leaves. You won't really find much about cabbage leaves as medicine in the herbal world here in the United States. It's not something people talk about, but it's very traditional to use cabbage leaf poultices on things that sting, things that burn, things that are swollen or engorged, by just crushing up the cabbage leaf and putting it against the skin. And what's going on there is the cabbage leaf contains a lot of sulfur compounds, some steroids, and also just by being the type of material it is, water is evaporating from it and it's maybe drawing draining fluids out of the injury, or maybe just drawing heat out of it through the process of evaporation and causing cooling at the same time that it's causing circulation to increase, which can feel like warming. So it's kind of got both of those things going on at once, physical cooling and perceived warming. So cabbage poultices have been a really common thing. Mustard plasters or mustard seeds ground up and used as a poultice or a compress have also been really common things. So food and medicine are much more entwined in folk medicine than they are in a more commercial version of herbal medicine, or in like the supplement industry, you might say. Although, of course, there's never completely any hard line between the two. So a lot of the time, if you're growing food, you're also growing medicine is the main thing I want to say in that regard. Growing things is not necessarily accessible to everyone. We tend to think of it as something that you can do if you have a yard, if you have a place to garden. Although I've grown at times when I did not have that. I've grown, now I have a place to garden. I have a house with a yard, but at times that I lived in an apartment that didn't have any sort of yard, I still sometimes grew things in containers and in windows, or in a balcony or something like that if I had one. And even when I was living on the streets, I did a little bit of planting of things that I knew would come up and that I would be able to go back for later. Although, of course, you're very limited in that type of a scenario in terms of what you can do and what you can hope to be able to get out of it. There are also community gardens in some places where people can go and garden and grow some things. So it's not entirely something that's limited to people that have possession of land, although it is more so than I wish it were. So you can garden with medicinal plants. You can garden in just about any type of situation, any type of microhabitat. Just like we were talking about last time, there are some plants that grow in shady places, some plants that grow in sunny places. If you're trying specifically to grow one plant, you're going to have to find or create the circumstances that plant likes. But if you have a piece of ground that you are working with, you can choose plants that are going to work well in that particular piece of ground, in that particular microclimate or habitat. So it's not necessarily, you might be able to modify what you are going to grow based on where you are going to grow it. So I have a couple of different kinds of things that I tend to cultivate. And this is, your methods and techniques might be different. This is sort of to suit the needs of what I have as someone who's seeing a lot of patients, a lot of people that I'm trying to help. If it were just a few, some of what I'm saying wouldn't necessarily apply so much. But a couple of the things that I consider when I'm deciding whether I want to try and cultivate something are, can I grow a meaningful amount of it? Can I grow enough, for example, to supply myself with it for the year? Or can I grow a significant portion of what I can grow, of what I would need for the year? Maybe I'll grow most of what I need and then, buy or harvest or barter for the rest. So that's one big consideration, is quantity. Can I grow an appropriate quantity of something? Another consideration for me is speed. How long is it going to take me to grow this thing? I don't really try and cultivate ginseng. I haven't ever really tried to cultivate ginseng or some other long growing plants, mostly because it would be, a process of multiple years, and something going wrong in anywhere in that span of years might ruin it for me. For instance, I did at one point try to grow some lady slipper orchids, but it wasn't on land that I owned or anything like that. It belonged to someone else, and they no longer have that piece of property. And so it's just like, put some effort into it, thinking, okay, maybe this will turn out into something, 10, 15 years from now that I can use some, but it didn't work out that way, which is fine. Now there's probably a patch of an extra stand of lady slipper out in the woods in that particular area, and it can be there and doesn't need to be harvested, but or harvested from. I wouldn't have harvested all of it or anything, but speed is another consideration. Quality is another consideration. Will I be able to grow a very good version of this thing? Do I have the conditions and so forth to be able to grow it well? And for some plants that require very specific circumstances, that can be a lot trickier. Something that I do grow, for instance, that does require somewhat specific circumstances is aloe. Aloe is a very easy thing to grow. You don't have to harvest a whole plant at once. You can take one leaf at a time. So it's something that does require specific situations, specific circumstances. But I like to grow aloe for burns. I don't treat a lot of burns here in the clinic. Most of the burns that I do treat are actually from radiation treatments. So, it's not something where I'm treating a lot of people who are coming in with burns, because this isn't an emergency room. Although at home, there's always burns. That's one of the, common things that you would do as a first aid measure, kitchen burns. And of course, I also do or have at times done a festival that involved fire and some fire accidents and things. And for that, I needed a larger amount of aloe, and I didn't grow it. But aloe is something that even though it requires a fairly specific set of circumstances, I can grow pretty easily. You can grow pretty easily. Lots of people keep an aloe plant on their windowsill. You don't start it from seed usually. You buy it in a pot and you put it in a sunny place and water it every month or two, and it does fine as long as it's got enough light, and you can break off a leaf when you need it. By contrast, vanilla is something you probably would not want to try and grow for yourself, because the circumstances it needs to grow well are very specific. The yield is very low, and the amount of work you would have to do to keep it alive and so forth would probably be pretty extensive. Now, you might want to grow it if you like growing orchids. It's a neat looking plant, and it's fun to say, hey, that's a vanilla plant. I've known people that have grown it, and more or less for those specific purposes. But trying to grow it for your own medicine is probably not very efficient as compared to purchasing some pure organic vanilla extract that doesn't cost that much and will last you a long time and doesn't require that much of your own labor. So quality, how well you would be able to grow it is another consideration. And then a final consideration is just sort of, is it something that's not readily available without you growing it? And that might be a reason why you would grow something. My favorite example of that is as an herb called mandrake. I don't really use mandrake much in my practice. I have a couple of times, but it's not really for anything that I would see very often, that I don't have other things to treat it for. It's in the nightshade family, somewhat toxic, but it has a very iconic status as a magical herbal plant. There are legends and myths about and things like that. So I like having it on the shelf. And when I did grow some, I grew it myself because there wasn't really, it doesn't grow around here, not the real mandrake. And it's not something that most people are willing to sell. So I usually just kind of grow it myself. You know, there's a legend that if you pick mandrakes, that they make a screaming sound that can make you pass out. And of course, that's just a fairy tale. But when I was working with it and did have the juice on my hands and stuff, I did start kind of hearing things. It wasn't like a scream, it was more like a beep. And it wasn't anything that was going to make me pass out. But maybe if you got enough of it, it is something that can be, it contains atropine, it contains hyoscyamine, it contains some similar very strong alkaloids that can get through your skin and can cause some auditory and visual hallucinations and possibly even loss of consciousness. So that's probably kind of where that legend originates. People talk about the mandrake root looking like a person's body, which really, I don't know. It doesn't look much more like a person's body than any other root. Sometimes it forks, you know, sometimes it looks like it has legs or whatever, but so does a carrot if you grow those yourself. So anyway, mandrake is something that I've grown on my own just because of availability. Aloe is something that requires specific circumstances that I've grown on my own. But most of the time when I'm growing something on my own, it's something that I'll be able to harvest soon, that I'll be able to grow as much of as I need for that year for my practice, or nearly so, and something that will be fairly easy for me to grow in the kinds of places I have available. So that narrows it down a lot. At one point, I experimented quite a bit with growing things here in the clinic in terrariums and containers. I have some, let's see, I have, here's an example of one. These containers with layered soil in them, and sometimes I would plant things in this. You got just soil and then sand and then rocks. So it has good drainage, even though it's a sealed container. And so I grew garlic in one of them, and I grew squills in another one. And then I have a big terrarium that's set up like that I grew golden seal in. Partly just to be able to show people what the plants looked like, just for the fun of having the green growing things around, and partly to see what it would be like to try and produce them in that ways, which it wasn't so spectacular. It was a lot of trouble for what I got out of it, but it was, it looked nice. It was nice to have around. I've also grown Dracaenas, dragon's blood Dracena, from seed here in the clinic, which is something that took a few years to grow, but I was able to grow a few years worth of it at a time, because it's not something I use very often. It's called dragon's blood because the sap looks like dragon's blood, or, well, the sap looks like blood. I don't really know what dragon's blood looks like, but the sap is reddish colored, and it can be used for internal bleeding if somebody has like a bleeding ulcer or something like that. So anyway, that's something that I have grown. But usually I try to grow easy things. Because I have a lot else to do, and because if I am going to grow something, I want to get a bunch of something out of it. So one of the things that I pretty consistently grow myself is garlic. And garlic is grown from bulbs rather than seeds usually. And so it's pretty easy to grow. You just dig up some ground, you put the bulbs in the ground, and then you wait. With that particular one, it's planted it in the fall and then harvested it the next year. And for each little bulb you plant, you get a whole clove that consists of several garlics out of it. So that's something I planted, something like 3 cloves of garlic. 3 3 heads of garlic and got dozens of heads of garlic back from doing so, which could be, used culinarily and also here in the clinic. I have garlic tincture, fresh garlic tinctured in alcohol and water. Plants that are in the nightshade family are pretty easy to grow. Mandrake is an extreme example, but peppers are, tomatoes are, and potatoes are more commonly grown. Eggplants and peppers are commonly grown too. So those are, more on the food side of things, but cayenne pepper is a really common, a really good medicine, really commonly used medicine, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. And so that's something that's fairly easy to grow. If you're growing it in a couple of buckets, or if you're growing it in a, say, 4x2 flower bed type of situation, you can grow a lot of it. You can probably grow enough because you don't use all that much at once, right? You don't usually want to use a whole lot of spicy pepper in your food. You don't usually want to use a whole lot in your medicine either. So you can probably grow enough to keep, a family and friends type of practice well supplied for the year pretty easily. And if it's, an even bigger group of people that you're treating, you can do that too without too much trouble. It doesn't take all that much cayenne to give you all you need. I usually go through something like 3 pounds of dried cayenne in the course of a year in this practice, and that's with seeing maybe 1,000, maybe doing 1,000 office visits or so. So that's something that you can pretty easily grow in large quantities, and is very relatively easy to grow. There's lots of information out there about how to grow it because it's a popular plant to grow. And so that's another good one. Plants in the mint family are also really popular herbs to grow for people. Similarly, if you grow spearmint or peppermint, you can grow lots of them. You got to be careful with the mints because they can be very invasive and they can try and take over your garden. I would say grow them just in containers and make sure you harvest them before they go to seed. And they will keep producing year after year, even so, just from vegetative reproduction, but just from sending out runners that come up from the roots. And so it's that's something that's easy to grow plenty of for yourself, for your family, for a small practice. Even if you're just growing in buckets, or even if you're just growing in, a flower planter or something like that, especially if you're growing in the ground and have a little bit of ground to grow in, you can grow lots and lots of it. And you can harvest it a few times a year. You can harvest around here. I usually can harvest spearmint twice a year. If I were really pushing it and, feeding it more and everything, maybe it would be 3 times, but I can usually harvest it. A big harvest of it twice a year. Once right around now or a week from now or so, and then another time later towards the end of summer. And so it's very prolific. And that's true of a lot of the mint family, which includes not only peppermint and spearmint, but also lemon balm, skullcap, motherwort, lots of herbal medicines that are part of this family, Lamiaceae. They're relatively easy to grow. They're prolific when you do grow them, and they're good medicine. So that's another area to be aware of as far as growing your own. In the culture I came from, or that I grew up in, I should say, in Eastern Kentucky, lots of people grew tobacco and cannabis, and those were also used medicinally, as well as, people grew them mainly as cash crops. but they also use them as home remedies as well. So, they're, and the tobacco, again, is part of that same nightshade family. And cannabis is not related to too many other green soft plants, but the plants that it is related to can be very prolific when they grow, kind of weedy type species. So those are some things that are relatively easy to grow. Now, if you're wanting to do something that is not so much that you have to tend to, shrubs can be really good too. If you have the patience for it, if you have the time to wait for it. A lot of the time it's going to be like 3 years before you get anything out of them. But for example, raspberry is a very good medicinal plant, and it's once you get started, it can grow in the same spot for ages and ages. And that's true with the mints too. I know of places where there are former home sites where there's a pile of stones that used to be the chimney, and the mints and the daffodils are still growing out in what used to be the yard, and the whole farm is just somewhere out in the woods now. So that they're if you plant some of these medicinal plants, they'll grow for 1 year, and then you'll have to replant the next year. And with some of them, including the mints and including raspberries and some other shrubs, they'll keep growing probably after you're gone, as long as nothing happens to the land that they're growing on. So that's that can be it can take a while for them to get going. Like I said, 3 years usually. If I were to plant raspberry plants, I would probably not try to harvest the leaves from them for the first couple of years, and then on the third year there would probably be an abundance of them, and they could withstand the strain and the lost energy of having leaves harvested from them. So let's see. Now, if you really have a long-term place to be, planting trees is not a bad idea at all. Although you can count on it being a long time before they really have much that's harvestable, depending on the type of tree. Willow is a plant that is often sort of cultivated or managed in a way that makes it produce large amounts, and that's something that you might do as a wildcrafter, or you might do if you have land that you're growing it on. It likes to grow near water and in wet ground, and it has a property where if you cut down a trunk of it, a stem of it, it will send up new stems. And if you keep doing that, you eventually get a coppice, just like an area where you have lots of thin, tall, skinny pieces of willow. And these are good for medicine because you can cut a few of them and peel them, and they're easy to peel because they're straight and not branchy much, and got that thin bark on them, so it's good medicinal bark. So cultivating them or managing them in that way, not necessarily that you would be growing them from seeds. You might come along and find a young willow tree and start just pruning it and having more pieces of it coming up from the roots. But that's another way that people have often cultivated and harvested plants that are medicinal. Often when people are doing it with willow, they would have been or would be using the stems for things like fencing, or for certain types of roofing or basket making or other furniture making, things like that. Not necessarily like structural timber, like holding the roof of a house up, but maybe like holding the thatch onto the roof, or making some simple furniture or things like that. So that's, and then the bark is sort of almost like a byproduct of that that happens to be medicinal. So that's another way that people can interact with plants and derive medicine from them, is just by, it's kind of pruning and cutting and encouraging lots of small growth instead of one big trunk. And that's, willow is a good plant to do that with. And there are places where people have been doing that with willow for a long time, and perhaps the whole area is one colony of willow that all has the same genetics and has maybe been, growing and being harvested by the same group of people on the same riverbank or the same side of a bog or whatever for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's a really neat thing that can be, it's very traditional. It's, different than modern forestry, but it's a way of selectively harvesting and consciously harvesting medicine and other materials from the environment. And there are other trees that can kind of grow in similar ways or be grown in similar ways. So trees don't necessarily have to be gigantic before you're harvesting anything from them. They don't necessarily have to be fully mature before things are being harvested from them. So in some cases, cultivating trees might be appropriate as well.
Hey, Andrew?
Yeah.
Does that willow, I have black willow growing in the backyard. So is it specific to the white willow, or
it's
would
not
either work?
specific to white willow? It probably either would work. There are a lot of different kinds of willow, and I'm not necessarily specifically familiar with each of them, but black willow is a really common one around here. And that one will definitely send up small trunks when the big trunk is cut down, or when the big trunk is intensively pruned sometimes. And so it is one that I'm sure can do that. And I think most of them can.
So essentially, if we extensively prune one tree, it causes it to sprout others up underground and come up in different places. Oh, cool.
Yeah, a lot of the time they'll come up around the base of the big tree or the parent tree, or sometimes further down the roots from that. So just like they start out as like suckers, and then they grow into small trunks, and eventually they would get full size if you let them, or they might. So yeah. And that same thing can also be done with some other trees, like I said. But for the most part, when people are cultivating, they're thinking about annual and perennial herbaceous plants. Thyme is another really good one that's in the mint family. A lot of the things that are in the sunflower family lend themselves really well. I talked previously about yarrow. That's an easy plant to cultivate because it's basically a weed. And, we all know how easy it is to grow weeds in your garden. You just kind of have to not do anything else, and they kind of take care of themselves. So there are several plants in that family that can be cultivated, or a lot of the time in my garden, I will allow certain things that show up as people call them volunteers, just things that you didn't plant, but they show up. Either through compost or through the general process of weeds being spread. And so for me, I will often let those things grow if there's something that I want to use medicinally, and I just, kind of consider them part of the garden, as long as they're not shading out or otherwise competing with something else I'm trying to grow. And some of the things that frequently see in that capacity would be mugwort, wild lettuce, and yellow dock. Those are probably the three that I see the most frequently. There are things that show up in my garden as volunteers that I use medicinally on a fairly regular basis. And those are all, the mugwort is part of the flower family loosely. The yellow dock is kind of its own thing, I guess. Let's say it was in the buckwheat family. There, and then the wild lettuce is also in the dandelion, sunflower, aster family. So yeah, a lot of the time when you're growing things, you might not only be growing the things you expected to grow. So it's a good thing to do, and this is a good time of the year to get started on it, which is part of the reason why I decided to have this be tonight's topic, is because I didn't want to go too far into the year before introducing it, in case people wanted to get out there and try some things. It's still kind of, fairly early here in Kentucky. Our last frost date is in May, so we often say that the second weekend in May or whatever is when you can be sure it's not going to frost anymore, which is, usually it doesn't frost that late in the year anyway, but it does often. It usually does frost sometime in April. So, it's not, those dates might get revised at some point as we tend to have warmer and warmer years, but they're still fairly reasonable to go by right now. And so, yeah, I would say, as far as, if you are going to grow some things, make sure you grow things that you like, things that you think that you would use, because there are a lot of things out there that are maybe that you'll see suggested as things to grow, but that might not be things that you have a connection with, or a sense of wonder and awe about. I think that's really important when you're getting started with something like this, is to follow your sense of wonder and awe and what you think is a neat thing to grow. Because if you're, growing something that's kind of boring to you, you're not going to feel as drawn to do it, and you're not going to gain those skills and experiences as readily as if you were doing something that you thought was really cool, even if it doesn't end up being something you use a whole lot of. So I think that, especially while you're in the learning stages, having fun with it, being excited about it, is probably more important than production, because you're gaining the skills, you're developing the abilities to grow things, and to view what you're growing as medicine and interact with what you're growing as medicine. And so that it's really important to have the enthusiasm about it that will carry you through, because it can be a long process of learning. One of the first things that I grew up out in the country, and then I moved to Lexington when I was a teenager. And when I moved to Lexington, I didn't really have any space of my own to grow things, but I wanted to grow some stuff. So I found sort of an area in not very much trafficked area in a park, and I just grew some things, and tried not to be too attached to what happened to it. But one of the first things I grew in that area was a plant called creeping thyme, sometimes also called mother of thyme, Thymus serpylium. And the main reason I grew it was because it featured in a story that I liked. It was a fairy tale from when I was a kid. And I'll tell you what happens in that story. In our language, it's called lusna mrat. Brat means like cloak or blanket. In the story, there are two healer gods. One of them helps a person who's had his hand cut off by creating a prosthesis for it that can move like a regular hand made out of silver. But the other one actually says, I'll go you one better, and he gets the hand to grow back by poulticing some unknown set of medicines on it, and just his innate ability as a healer. So the guy's hand grows back, but the two healers quarrel about it, and one kills the other. The father, actually, the first one is the father who made the prosthesis. He kills the son who made the hand grow back. And then, of course, after that's happened, he's heartbroken at what he's done, and buries him. And the sister of the person who's been killed, she gathers up a bunch of medicinal plants, 365 different medicinal plants, and lays them as flowers on his grave, and waters them with her tears, cries over them, and she spreads her cloak, her brat, over the flowers, over the grave. And then over the winter, it breaks down and the flowers break down. And then in the spring, this new plant emerges, this sort of somehow miraculously been created from the 365 other herbs, as well as, her tears and her magical cloak. And that plant is creeping thyme, which grows in sort of like a mat. So it's like it has sort of the shape of a cloak or a blanket spread across the ground. And so really not because I needed it as a respiratory decongestant or saw myself using it in that way, but mainly because that was a story I grew up with and that I liked, and I wanted to grow the plant that was in that story. I went and found some seeds for it, and I planted them in some sandy soil in a corner of a park here in Lexington, and they grew. And in the next spring there was a big blanket of the stuff, and it persisted for a few years without me doing anything else to it. Eventually it died off because it's not really a plant that tends to grow around here. Although sometimes if it's used in landscaping, it will grow for a long time in the same place. In this case, it hung out for a few years, but really just, I feel like that sense of feeling the magic of it, and the sense of feeling excited about what you're doing and excited about seeing what comes up after you plant this stuff is a huge part of the reason for anybody to do gardening who's not doing it for their own survival. And if you are doing it for your own survival, it's still a fun part of the process. It's still, good to be excited about what you're doing. So I encourage everybody to grow medicinal plants in ways that makes them feel excited about the powers that these plants will give you, the process of these plants growing and living, the traditions and the connections that you're tapping into, and the stories and narratives that you're tapping into by growing and using these things, and to be conscious of all of that as a part of the process, as a part of, cultivating the medicine while you're cultivating your own medicinal abilities. So, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the process of growing things. Like I said, there are lots of good books out there. Rodale's organic gardening books were the ones that I kind of read when I was getting started, but there are, tons of them out there, probably some specific for wherever you live and things like that, about the process. But, when you're selecting a place for where the plant grows, you want to be aware of a few specific conditions, one of which is the time of year that you're planting it. That's a huge one. Sometimes it's a little bit flexible. If you look on the seed packet, it'll say when to plant it. And that's a little bit flexible, but you have to kind of go by it at least somewhat. You have to be close. It doesn't have to be exact, but you have to be close. It helps to be close. You want to look at the type of soil that this plant likes to grow in, and that's important to know because some plants like to grow in sandy soil, some plants like to grow in clay, muddy soil, some plants like to grow in dust, so dusty soil. So looking at what kind of soil you're growing in is really important. Looking at how much light the plant is going to get is really important too, especially for something that's meant to produce fruit. Something that's meant to produce leaves, it can grow leaves without a ton of light. If it's meant to produce anything sweet, anything fruity, thing like that, it's going to need to collect a lot of calories from the sunlight to be able to put those calories into the food. So that's true of seeds in general, not just soft, sweet fruits that we would eat, but also pretty much anything that you want to produce a lot of seeds is going to need to do that. And the other thing that you want to be aware of is predation. What might eat things? You know, are they going to be destroyed? Are they going to be consumed by rabbits, groundhogs, things like that? So, you know, you want to either do something to physically protect them, like a fence, or else you want to maybe find a place where they're not going to run into that in the first place, like on a windowsill. And right now I have some calendula growing on a windowsill. I have some aloe growing on a windowsill, and I have, what else do I have? I have some basil and some rosemary also growing on a windowsill. So, you know, there are a lot of things that you can grow small amounts of in a small space like that. And, you know, especially if you're just growing for a few people, you might not need a huge space. You might not need a lot of something. If you have a place where there's a lot of, you know, hoppy creatures coming around to eat the vegetation, you might want a plant that doesn't taste that good. Lavender is a great example. Not many things like to chew on lavender. It's very bitter. It's very aromatic. You know, I don't really think that, you know, the chickens don't eat it. Squirrels don't eat it. I've got some in my yard, and, you know, it's like, it's just for us. Nobody else messes with it. You know? So you just got to weed it once in a while. And that's really great because, you know, it can be very frustrating to have something growing and be like, oh, this is doing wonderful. And then you come out and it's gone because the deer ate it, or, you know, the groundhogs ate it, or whatever you happen to have around there. So, you know, making sure that it's protected and or is able to protect itself is a good thing to be thinking about when you're growing things. And, you know, kind of make a plan as far as how you're going to harvest it, what you're going to do with it, and things like that. Sometimes, you know, you might have an herb that you use for a few different things. Maybe you'll, you know, grow the stuff that you want to make into a salve and buy the stuff you want to make into an oil or a tincture or something like that. Doesn't have to be your entire supply of things, although it's feels like a real sense of accomplishment when it is. Just a second. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the herbs. Well, this week's couple of herbs, which I'm going to talk a little bit about growing them as well. I already have some, but this is garlic. And so with this, you know, you can see I've made the tincture out of the whole cloves of garlic. And this is the liquid that it's sitting in is about 25% alcohol, 75% water, which is strong enough to keep it from ever going bad. And garlic is a member of the genus Allium, which also includes onions and several wild plants that are, and leeks, which are a cultivated plant. So there are, you know, multiple wild plants that are a member of the genus too. They all taste kind of oniony or garlicky, which is because they all contain this category of chemicals called isothiocyanates. And the thio part means sulfur. They're sulfur compounds. It contains other sulfur compounds too. But lots of sulfur compounds. It draws that sulfur from the soil. So plants can't make sulfur. They can change the form that sulfur is in, but they can't actually create sulfur. It's one of the elements. It's something that's either there or it's not there. Fortunately, it's there in most soil, and in the soil around here, there's lots of it. So it's those compounds do a lot of different things. One thing that they do that everybody notices is that they sort of irritate the mucous membranes. Okay, so if you start chopping up an onion, you start crying, it's because these little droplets of onion juice are floating in the air. They come in contact with your eyes and the insides of your nostrils, and they cause some irritation and make some fluid start running to try and wash them out. So that's one of the first things that people notice that they do. And if you're taking them by mouth, they will do that if you take a large enough quantity. They'll especially irritate the mucous membranes of your digestive system, causing an upset stomach. And that's usually not what you want when you take them, but it is a potential outcome. And it is something that people have used them for on purpose to try and provoke diarrhea or something like that. But it's not usually what you want. It is, fortunately, just about the worst thing that they do. So that and causing bad breath, So they're not very dangerous, but they are very strong. They're very potent. The thing I use garlic for most frequently in my practice is for killing bacteria. And it's really, really good at it. At one point, and this has been many years ago now, when methicillin-resistant Staph aureus was first starting to become a community-acquired thing instead of just something that people got in hospitals, I started getting a lot of referrals from physicians who were telling people to come to me and get treated for this infection, because garlic works just fine against it. I usually use garlic and myrrh together because I like to use 2 anti-infectives at a time, anytime that there is a bacterial infection. But garlic works fine for staph. It doesn't really matter that it's drug resistant to the garlic. Garlic works about the same against staph as it has for thousands of years. We haven't always known about the organism staph, but we've been able to recognize the skin condition impetigo, which it turns out is a staph infection. We've been able to recognize, what a staph infection looked like since the time of the ancient Greeks. So, we have a long history of use of this plant and others like it for this bacteria, thousands of years, in fact. So it's good for that. There have been not a lot of clinical trials with garlic for bacterial infection, unfortunately. There have been a lot of lab studies of garlic for bacterial infection, most of which were in vitro. And in vitro studies for infection aren't always necessarily very reliable because you're actually applying the substance directly to the bacteria rather than taking it into your body and having it spread through your body and get to where the bacteria is. But in the in vitro studies that have been done, garlic works against pretty much everything. It works against, a very wide variety of bacteria. It's been tested against the bacteria that cause a lot of different serious issues, things like strep, tuberculosis, all sorts of things. And it works against pretty much everything. In real life, it's not quite that good, but it is really good. And it is really kind of what you might call broad spectrum. It works against gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. It works against anaerobic and aerobic bacteria. So it's got a really wide range of things that you can, bacteria that you can kill with it. And the nice thing about garlic is you can take a lot of it and not have to worry about it really like doing anything other than, maybe messing up your digestion or something like that. It's very safe. So a lot of the time, if I myself start to feel like I have some sort of sore throat, or if I'm starting to cough up phlegm, something like that, which that doesn't happen to me often at all, but when it does, the first thing I usually reach for is garlic. And my preferred way of taking garlic is to just take a whole clove of garlic and chew it up and wash it down with some water. Just bite it 3 or 4 times to crunch it up and then wash it down with some water. When the kids were little and I would give them garlic, I would mince it up real finely and mix it with honey and put it on a spoon and let them wash that down so they only taste the honey and not the garlic. when it's me, I don't bother with all of that. But that was a way that I was able to get, kids from about 2 years old or so to take fresh garlic. You can just kind of convince them to, rinse it down immediately and not just suck the honey off of it until they're just sucking on raw garlic, which is what they're kind of inclined to do without other instructions. But if you can get them to wash it down like that, garlic and honey can be a really good immune support for young kids, and it works well for adults too. So yeah, when I was traveling more and I was around a lot of sick people, a lot of people who were maybe marginally nourished and things like that, like when I was going to rainbow gatherings, sometimes I would eat a clove of garlic on a daily basis just to kind of, keep germs away from me, maybe even keep people away from me. But if I felt something, I would maybe do that 3 times a day if I felt like I was coming down with something. And it seemed to work pretty well. Here in the clinic, I have a lot of people who will have something going on where, maybe they have a wound that appears infected, or maybe do a swab of their throat and see something that's consistent with the presence of strep, and do garlic and myrrh for a few days and then check again and have it be all better. So that's something that's is pretty useful for that sort of thing. And that's a really important thing to have kind of in your toolkit as an herbalist, is something that can fight against bacteria, something that can keep bacteria from overgrowing, because they come into a lot of different clinical scenarios. Now, the area that garlic has had a lot of clinical trials for is its effect on blood pressure and circulation. And that's like an entirely separate category of things that garlic does. So a lot of the time, if you see garlic products in the supplement section, sometimes it'll be like aged garlic or odorless garlic, things like that. And the reason for that is that the main sulfur compound that works on the blood vessels and opening up the blood vessels, thereby relieving blood pressure and increasing circulation, that substance isn't the same stuff that makes it smell the way it does. So the odorless garlic isn't so good for fighting germs, but it is good for the circulatory system and cardiovascular health. And like I said, there have been a bunch of clinical trials on that. I think last time I looked, there were over 30 clinical trials, and they had a mixed variety of methods and a mixed variety of results. But the general upshot is if you take enough garlic, it will usually have a modest effect on blood pressure. It's not like the most powerful thing for blood pressure, which, that's kind of usually with blood pressure, you need to do something for the blood vessels themselves, and also something for the kidneys, and sometimes something for the nerves as well. So garlic is only one of those things. It's only for the blood vessels themselves, but it is useful for increasing circulation, opening up the blood vessels, things like that. So vasodilator. Rubefacient, which means that it increases circulation. You can put it on topically to increase circulation to a specific place as well. A lot of people don't really like topical garlic because it smells bad, and that's kind of garlic's downfall, is that a lot of people find the smell kind of objectionable in social circumstances. People like the way it smells and tastes when there's food involved, when it's a cooking thing, but not so much just when it's on a person's body or on their breath or something like that. Another traditional use of garlic is to relieve pain from arthritis, especially osteoarthritis, which is the kind of arthritis that your joints get from wear and tear, just from either damage in accidents and things like that, or just from being worn out from having lived a long time, or maybe even not that long, but just from having used them, repetitive use. I'm not entirely sure to what extent that effect is from the increase in circulation, but it also does contain some of the sulfur compounds that it contains are also anti-inflammatory and may also be reducing the inflammation in the joints. So that's another category that that is useful for. And so, like I said, when I take garlic myself, I usually take raw garlic and I crunch it up and swallow it. And that's like 5 grams or so of garlic. When I am making it into a tincture, I will usually give somebody between 5 and 15 grams of the tincture. That's between a teaspoon to a tablespoon, or a teaspoon to 3 teaspoons of the tincture as a medicinal dose. And so that's actually a bigger dose than a lot of what people are doing in the studies on it. So again, with that, with making the tincture, let's see. So if I'm going to make a pound of garlic into a tincture, usually what I'll do is a pound of fresh garlic and 16 ounces of water and 16 ounces of 50% alcohol. So, 100 proof vodka, something like that. So basically equal parts of the garlic, the water, and the vodka. And you really have to let that sit for about a month. If you want it to get done faster, you can chop the garlic up, although that does change the flavor of it some. It does change the chemical composition some if you chop it up before it's in the tincture. So if I just put the whole cloves in the jar and then add the 2 liquids to it, and and then wait. And so that's my usual way of preparing that tincture. And
do you use, I'm sorry, do you use like just tap water or distilled water, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter much. I use spring water. I use spring water from a beautiful spring up in the mountains called Climax Springs that you can buy their water at the local health food store here. And so that's what I usually use. I don't really like the idea of using tap water because it's got chlorine and other things in it that I think are kind of gross. But if someone gave me a tincture made with tap water and another one made with the mountain spring water I'm talking about, I am not sure I would be able to tell the difference between them. So to me, it makes some difference, but I can't really promise you that that's anything other than aesthetics when it comes down to practical terms. So yeah, I like to use spring water. But like I said, I don't think it makes much difference. I think it's going to be pretty similar, of course, depending on how good or how bad your spring and or tap water is. Yeah, that's how I do it. And with the variety of alcohol, doesn't matter as much either. I like to use vodka because it's kind of it's very neutral. It doesn't have any barrel aged flavors added to it or anything like that. So it's just kind of a pure way of doing it, a pure form of alcohol. If you want to make garlic that is not in alcohol, the stuff that makes garlic do what it does will also come out in oil. The way I like to make garlic as an oil is to take dried garlic and infuse that in oil. Usually I do it in a warm place, but that's a way it can be and traditionally has been prepared both as a water and alcohol-based extract, and also as an oil-based extract, and also in other ways too. You know, sometimes crushing the garlic up and putting it right on an injury is a way you can do it. If you've got an infected wound and you crush garlic up and wrap it in gauze and put it directly on the wound, it will irritate the wound and it will make it drain a lot, but it will also kill the bacteria in it. So that's kind of a dramatic, harsh way of doing things, which I usually in my own practice don't tend towards dramatic and harsh, but it's definitely a thing that is out there. And it's definitely, you know, something that has been done quite a bit. Just a second. Yeah, Gretchen reminds us that for anyone who's watching this on the video, especially, that if you go to Climax Springs, if you live around here, it's about an hour and change south of Lexington, and it's the water's free if you go there, or you can buy the water in stores as well, in refillable, returnable 5-gallon jugs. But if you want to go to the place, you can get as much of the water as you want for free, and it's a lovely place to go. It's up in the hills, and it's very pure water and all that. So I really like both going there and just using their water in general. And I like the feeling that the water that I'm using is coming from a special place, you know. But yeah, I don't necessarily know that I would be able to taste the difference between a tincture made with that and some other source of water.
But the intention is there, and sometimes that makes a difference.
Yes, the intention is there, and yeah, kind of, I don't know. To me, it's an art form. You know, making medicine is like something that I respect and treat as a sacred process and as an art form, and you know, trying to use the best quality ingredients that I can is part of that. So yeah, garlic is something that's it's pretty easy to grow, pretty easy to grow a lot of, and it's great if you're a new gardener as well, because it is easy to grow plenty of, and it's like it's done sooner than a lot of the other things. So it's like you know, kind of a very encouraging, heartening kind of thing to grow, as well as a heart healthy thing to use as medicine. I'm now seeing from another comment that in some places you can get Climax spring water delivered. I don't know whether they do that here in town or not. I suppose they probably do, since the store has it and someone must bring it to them. But I never really thought about that. So this next medicine I want to talk about is cayenne. And this is a tincture that I made with dried powdered cayenne. This isn't from my garden. It's from Frontier Herb Co-op. But I do grow cayenne in my garden, and grow most of what I use here in my practice with it. So cayenne, as you know, is spicy. It tastes hot. When you put it on your skin, it can also feel hot to your skin sometimes. And what is going on there is that there's a substance in cayenne that's actually, well, the capsaicin in cayenne, the substance that makes it spicy, actually interacts with a structure inside your nervous system that is part of how your body feels heat. And it actually kind of causes let's see, how should I put this? It causes electricity to flow through this particular circuit, which it would only normally flow through at higher temperatures. So normally there's a change in the way that your body handles calcium in this part of your nervous system that happens at higher temperatures, but it also happens in the presence of capsaicin. So the capsaicin can feel like heat, even though the temperature isn't actually rising. I have two main forms that I use cayenne in, tincture form here, and then also an oil extract of cayenne. And I like to dry the cayenne before using it for either of those things, because cayenne has quite a bit of water in it. And by drying it, it's easier to tell how much of it you actually have, because the amount of cayenne in a pepper can be different. Like the amount of weight that a pepper loses when it dries is pretty variable. So, it could feel like you had twice as much cayenne as you actually did if you used it while it was wet. So when I'm using cayenne from the garden, I dry it whole and then crush it up, seeds and all, and then use that to make the medicine out of. When I buy it, it's usually in powdered form. And similar to garlic, it's spicy. It will irritate your mucous membranes. It can cause actual pain, but it's not really very dangerous at all. Like, people don't really die from cayenne or anything like that. If you get it in your eyes, it feels like you've done something seriously damaging, but it doesn't really cause damage. It just causes a lot of irritation, which goes away, and then, miraculously, even though it feels like your eye is being dissolved by acid, it's actually not, and it's actually okay afterwards. So it's dramatic, but it's pretty safe. So people use cayenne for a few different things. And one of them is specifically to cause pain. If you take cayenne, if you put cayenne in someone's mouth, or if they put it in their own mouth, it will come sometimes. The pain will actually wake them up. So people have used cayenne as sort of like a hangover remedy, or I've heard of people using cayenne in the past to try and rouse people from a stupor that was induced by opium. It's not what I would use myself, but it is definitely a thing that has been used. Of course, there are weapons made from capsaicin, which is, like pepper spray. Same substance as what's in cayenne. So, there are, can be a pain-inducing kind of thing, but it is also used as what's called a counter irritant. And counter irritant means that it causes a more superficial form of pain to distract from a deeper form of pain. An example would be if someone had a really painful joint, and then they rub some capsaicin oil, some cayenne oil, or capsaicin cream or something on it, and it causes the skin to feel warm and in a little bit of pain, but draws away from the pain in the deeper part, and makes it so that the deeper, more severe pain is less felt. So that's called a counter irritant. And when I say capsaicin, so a couple of words that I'm using here. Capsicum is the Latin name of cayenne and other peppers. Capsaicin is the spicy substance in it, and cayenne is just its common name, cayenne pepper. So it's used to generate pain in a therapeutic situation. And that's actually, there are still a lot of over-the-counter drugs that have capsaicin as an active ingredient, that are used as muscle rubs and things like that. So it's as an external medicine for pain, it's still very common. One form of pain that's very widely used and even prescribed for is post-herpetic neuralgia, which is like a shooting sort of nerve pain that people get after having a herpes outbreak or after having usually shingles outbreak, because it's a virus that kind of attacks the nerves or causes damage to the nerves and causes a lasting shooting pain that sticks around after the blisters are gone. And cayenne can help with that. And that's the oil of cayenne is what I would usually use in that situation. It tends to persist on the skin for a while, stay in the skin for a while, and keep the reaction going, keep the therapeutic process going for longer than the tincture or than other forms of it would be. And just like with garlic, this is a vegetable people grow in their garden for food, and then also use medicinally when they have occasion to. And just like with garlic, it's a dramatic one that people like to use and have liked to use because they see results quickly. So, it is possible to make a paste from it, from either from crushing up the fresh pepper or from mixing the powder with a little bit of vinegar or water and applying that directly to the skin, or taping that onto the skin under a bandage or something like that. And things that people have done for pain and for some other things, often for muscle tension, because the sensation of heat relaxes the muscle, and then the counter irritant effect takes away the soreness of the muscle. So it can be really useful for that. Taken internally, it's like garlic is a vasodilator. It can cause a sort of sensation of flushing or blushing, a feeling of heat, and that's something that is also very noticeable. Again, with cayenne, it can cause irritation, much like garlic can, to the mucous membranes, especially the digestion. And you can kind of feel cayenne all the way through your digestive tract if you have a large amount of it in your food or as medicine. If somebody has any sort of sores on the surface of their skin, cayenne will tend to make them run, because it's opening up the lymph vessels, causing the lymph fluid to move more freely. So a lot of the time, if somebody has a sore, it will start draining if the person takes cayenne. Sorry, might be a little bit gross to hear about, but that's part of the job. But especially, so sometimes that's really helpful for old sores or for non-healing sores. If somebody has like sores on their feet that don't heal because they can't feel them very well, then sometimes cayenne topically will help with the returning of the sensation, and cayenne internally will help to sort of flush those things out from the inside by just causing the lymph to flow through them and wash them out. So sometimes it can be used as part of a strategy for wound care, although it can be irritating too. So, you have to be sort of careful about that.
Thank you. Is this also good in any way for just general lymphatic health, cayenne or garlic?
Yeah, both of them do, and especially cayenne do move the lymph. Are useful for general lymphatic health because they cause the fluid to move, and that's a really important thing. This is a concept that's a really huge part of medicine in some traditional systems, especially in Ayurveda, of making the juices flow in the body. and that being, necessary for healing because it redistributes nutrients and energy and things like that throughout the body. But yeah, for general lymphatic health, it is something that is useful. Again, it's not necessarily what I would use because it is kind of harsh. And there are other herbs that we'll hear about later, like sarsaparilla and even melon seeds, that move the lymph pretty strongly without being like fiery. But they do both of them do help with the movement of the lymph and can be a good thing for that.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So, like, I guess COVID can affect people's lymphatic systems. And I was wondering if like a garlic cayenne combination would be good to like flush COVID out.
It might. I'll talk a little bit about combining them here in a minute, but I wanted to say a few more things about cayenne first, which is, sometimes cayenne has been used as an inhalant, like actually snorting the powder of cayenne. That's a really dramatic thing to do, a really intense thing to do. If I were going to do something like an inhaled cayenne, I would actually probably do a mist form of the tincture because it would be, not particles getting snorted up into the sinuses. But that actually was investigated with positive results as a remedy for certain types of headaches called cluster headaches, which tend to be short, very intense. They're like migraines, but they happen faster, or they are more compressed in their both their duration and their intensity. I do. So I haven't really had occasion to use cayenne for that, but I think it's an interesting thing to know about. And then, like I said, cayenne can be used as a poultice on injuries and things like that. Although personally, I prefer a wash for that. Cayenne can also be prepared in water, and that is sort of, in most cases, going to be a less intense way of preparing it than the oil. So if you actually just were to make a tea out of cayenne and then let it cool, and then use that to rinse out a wound or to wash the feet, it's kind of, it penetrates into the skin faster than the oil, and then it's kind of done faster as well. It sort of, its effect wears off faster. So that's another way of preparing it. So like garlic, cayenne can be used as in an oil form or in a tincture form. So it's got some water-based and some partially water-soluble and partially oil-soluble substances in it. In garlic, the substances are more like resiny type stuff, and in cayenne, they're more oily type stuff, but they do disperse in water. As you know, if you've ever put cayenne pepper in soup, it does make the soup hot, even though it's not really water soluble. It kind of disperses throughout the water as little droplets. So yeah, cayenne and garlic can be used together synergistically, right? So that's one reason I chose the two of them to talk about today, is because they often have been and can be and are used in combination with each other. You were asking about COVID, and so in that sort of situation, I don't know that it would actually flush viruses out of the body. It might, but it will at least move around the resources that the body uses to fight viruses by moving the lymph system around. And the lymph system moves lymphocytes, which are pathogen-fighting, pathogen-destroying cells around throughout the body. So it would at least, give you more of a chance of getting the treatment to where it needs to go because of it being spicy and it moving things around. And often just the process of having the lymph system move will make people feel better too. So that's always a positive type of thing. There's a formula that I use quite a bit that involves the two of them, garlic and cayenne, along with another herb called lobelia. And that's a formula that I got from a physician named Samuel Thompson. And Samuel Thompson got a lot of his ideas from the Native American peoples, but he didn't really give them most of the credit for that. And so I don't know exactly whether this was an original idea for him or whether it was one that he stole off of somebody, but it became very popular. He used a lot of spicy remedies like garlic and cayenne, and he also used a lot of sweating, which was obviously taken from native traditions. Although we did have that tradition in Europe in some places as well, but in his case, he got the idea from Native Americans. And so garlic and cayenne work together to both move the fluids through the body and kill germs, especially bacteria, also some funguses, things like that. Lobelia is, we'll get into lobelia more later on, but it's kind of like, it makes people, it can give people a little bit of a sense of calmness and energy and euphoria. So he used that a lot because it kind of helps with a perception of how good you feel, regardless of what's going on. So his medicine was a huge, I would go so far as to call it a fad, not to say that he didn't have some good ideas and practices, but it was basically like the big health fad of his day in the late 1700s and early 1800s, I think it was. So that was an example of garlic and cayenne being used together. Garlic is native to Eurasia and cayenne is native to South America. So even though both of them had been used where they grew for ages and ages, they hadn't really been used in combination until people started having trade networks that included both of those places. More recently, fire cider has been a popular remedy, and it includes garlic and cayenne. There are a lot of different remedies for fire cider, but usually garlic, ginger, cayenne, things like that in a vinegar extract, in apple cider vinegar, is kind of the general idea. And this is sort of something that if you took it while you were congested, it would kind of get your fluids moving and get the congestion to run out of your nose and break up the phlegm in your chest, things like that. It will also make the fluids move in your digestive system, so it can improve digestion. And so it's kind of like a remedy that people use for a lot of different things. And there was an interesting thing that happened a few years ago, where a company called, I believe they were called Shire City, they filed a trademark on fire cider, which the name fire cider had been around since at least the 70s. Rosemary Gladstar, who was sort of one of the people who helped to make herbal medicine more popular in the 1970s. She's written a lot of books about herbal medicine, and she still teaches herbal medicine, but she kind of, was a big part of herbal medicine being like part of the hippie movement. And that led to there being more of an herbal industry in the 80s and an herbal profession in the late 80s and 90s and so forth. So she's kind of has had a lot to do with the direction herbal medicine has taken in the United States in the last 50 years or so. So Rosemary Gladstar wrote about fire cider, and lots of people made their own varieties of fire cider. And then this company came along and trademarked it. And the government granted them a trademark on it and said, oh, yeah, this is your property now. And so then they started threatening to sue people who made something that they called fire cider. They said, no, only we can call it fire cider now. And so some people refused to change what they were doing and actually went to court against them, and eventually won, with the kind of ruling was that even though the name fire cider wasn't known to the general public, it was well known in a relevant community of people, so that it was not valid to give them a trademark on it, and that the trademark office acted in error in doing so. So that ruling got handed down, I guess, in 2019, because they announced it at the American Herbalist Guild conference, which was in October of that year. So, you know, that's something that's kind of been fought for and litigated and came out all right. But yeah, it's a good bad example of people trying to trademark intellectual property that they did not come up with, which is unfortunately something that happens from time to time in the herbal world. Sorry. So garlic and cayenne together are going to work a little bit differently than garlic and cayenne separately. Specifically, both of them are going to be doing a lot of the same things, but they're going to be doing it through different methods. Even though both of them are spicy, both of them are being perceived as hot by the human nervous system, and by the human, well, you know, by the mucous membranes in the skin and things like that. They're both being perceived as hot. They're both opening up the blood vessels. They're both increasing the movement of fluids in the body, but they're doing these things, you know, cayenne is doing it with the capsaicin, which is sort of changing how electricity is being conducted in the nervous system. And garlic is doing it through the sulfur compounds, which are, you know, I'm not exactly sure on a molecular level what all those sulfur compounds are doing to make that happen, but it's a different sort of burn, basically. And so both of them are working at once, and so it's producing an overall effect that's actually kind of multiplied by each other. It can be actually synergistic is kind of a really overused word, but it can be more than just an additive effect. It can the cayenne is potentiating the garlic, and the garlic is potentiating the cayenne at the same time. So because each of them is opening up the blood vessels, each of them is helping the other one to get to all the places that are downstream in the blood vessels. So, you know, basically you'll have the cayenne more freely flowing through the body because of the garlic, and the garlic more freely flowing through the body because of the cayenne. So both of them are making each other do more of what they do. So, for example, in the case of, let's say someone has an infected sore on their foot, and if they're taking garlic by itself, it might not really get there, because it might not really reach that sore, because the reason the sore is there is because of a lack of circulation. And if someone is taking cayenne, maybe the cayenne will start to increase the circulation to the area, but it's going to have a very limited effect on the infection itself, only in terms of, you know, getting more fluids there and helping it rinse itself out. If you're taking them both together, the garlic is going to be getting there because of the cayenne and moving through the affected area because of the cayenne. And then it's going to be killing the bacteria which is going to make it so that the problem is not continuing to be perpetuated by the infection. So you have the potential for having almost like a virtuous cycle where one is making the other work better, and then that one in turn is making the first one work better. The opposite of a vicious cycle, I mean. So I call that a virtuous cycle. But you have, a situation where the two of them together are working in ways that either of them alone would not. And when I'm trying to get that to happen, I like to make things into a compound. Now, it's possible that somebody could just take garlic and take cayenne. Maybe they have them both as capsules, for instance. You could take some cayenne capsules, take some garlic capsules. Or maybe you would be taking, maybe you'd have a garlic compress and then take a cayenne tincture, something like that, or take a garlic tincture and use a cayenne oil on the surface. And all of that can work. And you might even want to try more than one of these scenarios together. But for my purposes, usually if I'm doing something like that, I'll have someone take both things internally, mixed together. And that way they're kind of both hitting the system together. There may be some interactions between the substances in the two things that are creating new substances. I'm not real sure about that, but it's a possibility. And so, I like to use most of the remedies that I give to people in my clinical practice are compound extracts. Simples are really good. They're really simple. So things that just contain one medicine, they're really simple in terms of knowing whether that thing worked or not. But as you get more comfortable and confident, sometimes it's good to try and combine things into synergistic formulas, at least in my experience. And you may find that you don't like doing it that way, but I really like combining things in that sort of way to try and make a synergistic effect and try and have them both working together and try and have all the parts of the formula be working towards a greater whole. So garlic and cayenne are both really good things for that. And like I said, they're both really feasible things for a lot of us to be able to grow. And I feel like that's, an important plus to them as well. They're, easy to control the means of production of those particular herbs, because you can make a large amount of them, or a relatively large amount of them, in a small space. All right. Any questions about garlic and cayenne?
I have a question regarding dosage of that compound extract.
Yeah.
I'm assuming we're sticking with what you said for garlic, between the teaspoon and the tablespoon.
Yeah.
What about the cayenne?
With the cayenne, I usually would make the cayenne a very relatively small amount of the mixture, and maybe have one more teaspoon of the total. So usually if I were mixing garlic and cayenne together, I would do something like 4 parts garlic and 1 part cayenne, because too much cayenne gets hard for people to take. Nobody's gonna, well, I don't know about nobody. Most people aren't gonna want to take multiple spoonfuls of straight cayenne tincture. It would be pretty intense to do so. If it's like 20% cayenne tincture and 80% garlic tincture, and you take 4 spoonfuls of it, then that's a pretty good mix of both, 4 teaspoons of it. So that's, or, so 2 to 4 teaspoons, something like that, of the combined extract. Hang on a second, I need to plug myself in before I run out of battery. seems to have worked. Yeah, so yeah. And, I mentioned before that you can make oil out of either one, too. So if you made oil out of both, you could also combine those. And there again, I would probably do, 3/4 to 4/5 of that being the garlic and the balance being the cayenne, because it tends to be, it can be a very intense burning feeling if you use too much of it or use it over too large of an area.
So if you're compounding the two together,
Yeah.
are you saying you would make that into like a compound tincture, or?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I would have
Okay.
both tinctures separately, and so I have both tinctures made up separately and then combine them together. It is possible to combine them and make a tincture out of that, which is similar to what fire cider is doing, is combining a bunch of herbs together, including garlic and cayenne, and making a vinegar extract rather than a tincture usually. But it is possible to have a compound maceration, which is where you combine herbs together and then add the liquid part. I never do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I never do it because then I can't unmix them. And if I need them separately, I can't use them separately. So it's not something that I think is necessarily in any way a bad practice from an outcome kind of perspective, but it's one that I find inconvenient, and so I don't ever do it, or maybe inefficient. So I don't do it, but some people do, and I'm not saying they're wrong in doing so. But yeah, usually I would have the separate tinctures and then just combine them together.
And you said the cayenne tincture, you would make it at about 20%. Is that right?
About 20% of the compound, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Excuse my ignorance.
no, it's fine. It's fine. I'm just trying to get the meaning across the best I can, and I'm not necessarily it's kind of that sort of thing is easier to get across in writing maybe than in speaking. So at least for me, I think it is. But so I'm trying to do it in a different sort of way.
Do you have like a specific things that you like to use that compound for specifically, or is it just kind of judge it for yourself? Or
I do have some specific things that I like to use that for. A lot of the time I use it for injuries that aren't healing. A lot of the time I would use it for congestion as well. So that's two totally separate things, but in both cases, it's about getting the fluids moving and getting the stagnation to break up. So that's kind of maybe a very theoretical concept, but the idea of stagnation, some people would say that stagnation is sort of the source of all diseases, and stagnation is just like stuff in the body not moving the way it's supposed to. And there are different kinds, but phlegm being stagnant in the respiratory system would be like congestion, or phlegm in your chest that rattles when you breathe, maybe coughing that's not producing anything or moving the phlegm that it needs to, that sort of thing. That would be like fluid congestion in the respiratory system, whereas constipation would be like congestion of the food, and blood clots or bad circulation would be congestion of, or stagnation of the blood. So it's useful for stagnation. It's useful for warming and moving fluids, which the sore, the non-healing sore example that I mentioned is one thing that would be good for. Some types of pain that are maybe from prolonged non-movement are another thing that it's good for. Poor circulation is another thing that it's really good for, and that can include high blood pressure. It can also include things like numbness in the tips of the toes and tips of the fingers, lack of sensation in the extremities. would be another example of something that I would use it for. So yeah, mostly moving some kind of stagnation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned the blood pressure piece, because that's kind of what I was thinking about that. But I guess for my husband, he tends to be like a hot person anyway.
Mhm.
So would the garlic itself, maybe with some hawthorn or something, be something more oh gosh.
It's complicated. It's complicated, possibly. I mean, it's a safe thing to try for sure. So, you know, I can't promise that that would work in that particular case, because if somebody comes to me with something like that, I spend a lot of time asking a bunch of questions, trying to sort out what's what and everything. But it is a safe thing to try, because it's, you know, not likely to cause any meaningful problems. And yeah, the cayenne and garlic, like I said, there's three parts basically to the blood pressure situation, which one of which is the tightness in the blood vessels themselves, and the garlic and cayenne are both working on that piece. Often the piece that gets the biggest movement to happen, the biggest change to happen, is fluid retention, excess fluid in the body, which staying hydrated, avoiding sodium in excess amounts, and sometimes taking a diuretic of some sort, something that causes people to pee more, whether it's cranberry juice or corn silk or hydrochlorothiazide. They're all doing essentially the same type of thing, which is making you pee more, which takes, it's like deflating your blood vessels because it's taking fluid out of them and removing pressure from them. So that's often the piece that you see the biggest change with. And then working on the nervous system, calming the person, you know, making it so that stress isn't having as big of an effect on their blood pressure often makes a big difference, especially in people where that top number is extremely variable and is a lot higher than the bottom number. So yeah, it's different for everybody, but certainly something like garlic and cayenne would be safe to try, or garlic and cayenne and then hawthorn or something like that. You know,
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I have one more kind of goofy question and then I'll shut up. For some reason, I just keep thinking of gout. And yes, and I don't know why that keeps popping into my head when you're talking about this compound, but is there any place for that in trying to help with gout, especially when it's like staying in like a toe or something like that?
That's what it does. So gout is partly about circulation and warmth. So that definitely has a role to play in that. You know, gout is a type of arthritis that happens when crystals of toxins, of waste products from the blood condense out of the blood when the blood gets cold, as it's far from the heart in the extremities, and crystallizes in the joints. And so a lot of the time it's made worse by cold. And the cayenne and garlic can help with warming it, especially even applied topically, and can help with the circulation to maybe help some of that crystallized stuff get reabsorbed. Really, though, you need to work on the kidneys and you need to work on more fluid and less of any kind of acidic things like wine, alcohol. Sometimes red meat makes it worse in some people. So avoiding those things or limiting them severely, and then strengthening the kidneys, because the kidneys are ultimately what's responsible for getting those toxins out of the body. But then, yeah, the heat, the warmth of the cayenne and garlic can help the blood flow to kind of reabsorb those crystals and help to get them to the kidneys so they can be gotten out of the body.
Okay, so, great. Yeah. Thank you.
Again, multifaceted treatment process, but and you know, most pathologies are, and that's why it takes a while to get to the point where you can really handle a lot of them competently. But it's, you know, garlic and cayenne are some things that you can use in a lot of situations, and they'll help some. So they're very versatile in that way. And, both very good things to have in your herbal medicine tool chest in terms of being able to help some of the common things that you would be likely to see when working with friends and family and that sort of scenario. So be thinking about the herb walk on the 28th. That's going to be at 11 in the morning. I'm still not quite sure how many people are coming, so I'm still not completely certain of where we're going to go. We might go to Heisel Farm Park, which is a park just outside of Lexington. But it kind of depends on how many people are going to be coming. If we go to that area, we'd be able to see some different types of microhabitats, some like areas around the pond, maybe some, open field, maybe some new forest or area that's kind of changing from field to forest and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where I'm leaning towards with the current size of group of people that have told me so far that they're coming. Another minor administrative thing that I wanted to mention is if anyone wants to pay me through Square, just send me an email letting me know that you'd like that, and I will send you an invoice for the monthly payment. And I can actually even make that into a recurring invoice, so it keeps sending it to you if you want to do it that way. But just let me know. And of course, my Venmo is still a possibility and is little easier for me because I don't get as much of a processing fee taken out of it if anybody wants to do it that way. So, and thanks to everybody who sent me money this past week. I greatly appreciate it. Great.
Can you say again the herb walk on the 28th is at 11 a.m.? Because I had it as 10, but it's my mistake.
Yeah, 11.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, any other questions before we go? Hang on just a second. Oh, good. Sounds like a number of you are planning to come to the herb walk, so I'm looking forward to it. Should be a good day to be out, good time of the year to be out and everything. Should be a decent amount of stuff for us to see. Yeah, so probably well, if you are doing any gardening this year and you're working on any of that right now, be thinking about maybe some plants you might like to grow and try getting some in the ground and see what kind of things you find out. It's always an interesting experience. So always a little bit different. And I feel like every year that I garden, I understand the plants a little bit better. And I feel like the same is true with going out to the woods to forage things and stuff like that. Every time I do it, that knowledge and experience deepens just a little bit and stays just a little bit closer to the surface. Like it's just easier for me to remember, the details of it every time. So it's a really good learning experience. And if it's something that you have the ability to do at all, I sincerely recommend it. And if you don't have the ability to do it this year, then, maybe next year, maybe sometime in the near future. All right. Well, I will be posting this. This is the other thing I want to say. I will be posting each week's class on the same YouTube channel. So if you want to subscribe to that channel, then you'll get a notification. You can get a notification each time that it comes out. In general, I'm going to try and post them each time the day after the class. This past time, it took me a couple days because I am still learning how to do this, and the initial way that I was trying to record it didn't work out, so I had to use the recording through the Zoom, which is what I'm doing again this time. So we will see how that goes, but yeah, I will send the link to everybody after I get this one uploaded. And if you want to subscribe to that channel, then you'll know anytime something gets uploaded to it. And that channel is just for this class or this course. It's not my general YouTube channel, which, by the way, would also be there's some great videos on there. Clinical Herbalist is my YouTube name for that one. The Medicine Wagon is the one that these classes are going to be on. So yeah, I will send that link out when this one gets uploaded, and encourage everyone to subscribe to that. But I'll keep sending the links out too. All right. Anything else? Any other questions?
Yeah, just one. Sorry. The Medicine Wagon on YouTube, is it all one word or?
Yes, all one word.
Okay, that might be what I'm doing wrong.
But yeah, that's. I might have to do something to make it findable. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it right now.
It might be something that you can only find if I send you a link to it, because I didn't really want it to be like for everybody. I wanted it to be for the people in this class. But if you follow the link to it, then you'll be able to find it, and then you'll be able to subscribe to it.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and I will be talking to you again soon. And if you think of any questions and want to email me between now and next week, then please feel free to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.